I've got a message saying that we're live streaming.
Yeah, it's on mine as well now. So.
Okay. So welcome to everybody. This is the Healthwatch Coventry Steering Group. This is a group which is made up of local people and representatives from voluntary and community groups, and it oversees the work of Healthwatch Coventry. So it makes decisions about what we do, and it also thinks about what's happening that is affecting the local community. So we meet in public, and this is the first time that we've done this using Zoom and streaming it via YouTube, as we're not able to meet in person at the moment due to the COVID epidemic. I'm now going to hand over to Stuart Linnell, who is the volunteer chair of Healthwatch, who's going to chair the meeting.
Ruth, thank you, and welcome everyone to this meeting. Welcome to all the steering group members and to anyone watching just on YouTube. We start by asking our members if there's any declaration of interest anyone wishes to make, so please indicate and we will note that accordingly. Thank you very much. The minutes of the last meeting have been circulated. Is everyone happy that they are accurate? If not, again, please indicate if you want to make any comment about the accuracy of the minutes. And similarly, are there any matters arising from those minutes that you wish to raise that are not on today's agenda? Everybody happy? Good, thank you. In which case, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda about local services, including consolidation for pharmacies. Ruth, could you take us through that?
Okay, so your first paper then is a letter which is about an application to consolidate, so effectively merge two Boots pharmacies which are located in Charlesmore in Coventry. Steering group members will remember that we discussed this some months ago and that we made a submission as part of that process. So this letter is the outcome, which shows that that consolidation has been turned down on the basis of a reduction in patient access, which of course is one of the things that we were raising on behalf of local people, because there would be a reduction in opening hours, but also the consolidated site is in a multi-use building shared by two GP practices, which is positive in one way, but the site that would be closing is in a busy parade of shops, which is accessible to lots of people. So that is for your information, so that you can see the outcome of that submission we made.
Good, thank you. We've also got two papers circulated about the renal service review and the review into adult critical care.
Yeah, so subsequently to the steering group papers going out, we had some more information sent through regarding the renal services review. So I sent round a sheet which is entitled Renal Service Rapid Review. It has a number of numbered points within it. So I was hoping Hakeem would be joining us at the meeting, because this is very much an area that he understands, him having actually used the services as well. But it's basically setting out what they are seeking to do as a result of the review. Take any, and they're asking for any feedback that we might want to give at this stage. So that could be support for the approach, anything that we think they've missed, or anything that we wish to say.
David, yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. In this review, there's a statement saying patients continually tell us that the transport service causes delays as inequitable, as not all patients receive the same transfer arrangements. Presumably this refers to the hospital transport service for renal patients. Before most of you were on steering, about 5 years ago, I think Ruth will confirm this, Healthwatch Coventry got quite closely involved with the situation at UHCW for renal dialysis, where patients were complaining that they were sometimes being picked up very late and not getting to start their dialysis on time. That was causing delays at the actual centre. And then people were waiting hours in the waiting room to be picked up afterwards. Now, this is said it's a Midland review, so I'm not sure whether this refers to at all UHCW. We did quite a lot of work, I think Ruth will agree, and we were quite satisfied after perhaps a year or so that things had improved in Coventry. But I think we should possibly try and find out, Ruth, whether this is happening again at UHCW.
Okay, so the non-emergency patient transport service, which transports renal patients, so that's a service which is commissioned from West Midlands Ambulance Service for our patients in Coventry. So there have been some history to this. So we had gone back to find out if the service had improved, and at that time there was a subcontracting arrangement in place with a voluntary sector group for some of the patients, which had made things better. So the reason why the renal review happens at a regional level is because renal services are commissioned at that level, because the numbers of patients is small, so it's not something that is not a service that a CCG would commission as they would with other local services. So that's why this has come from NHS England and NHS Improvement. So patient transport, so they've obviously picked up on that, and we've got some supporting evidence around the importance of patient transport for patients. So if you're having dialysis, you're going 3 times a week for big block sessions. So actually waiting around for your transport, whether that's at either end, has a significant impact. And often renal patients are not able to drive, particularly after having dialysis, because of the impact of the treatment. So that's why patient transport is really important. Anybody got any other comments about what they're proposing to look at? So I noted that under 6, for example, providing patient-centred care is referenced, which is something that we would support. Have they got that right, for example, is in terms of their take on patient-centred care?
They talk there, don't they, about depression and anxiety as a consequence of the issues that arise from all of this. And I think we're seeing that, aren't we, in other parts of the NHS just at the moment, putting a lot of stress on the care that's being provided. But as Ruth says, does anybody want to contribute further about this issue? Are we all?
Would you like me to reply, because these are coming by email, so would you like me to email back and just say that we have had this on the agenda of our steering group meeting, so we're aware of the piece of work and that we're interested in the piece of work, and being updated as it progresses, and that broadly we think that these areas identified are the right things for them to focus on. Yeah, we're getting nods.
That meets with the common consent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So the other bit of the paper is a different review, but also happening at that NHS England, NHS improvement level. So there's been an ongoing review, and actually the timeline for this is quite short, so it'll be concluded soon. So there's been a review of adult critical care beds across the bigger geography. So as part of that, they're looking at what numbers of critical care beds there should be in which trust. And there has been a representative from West Midlands Healthwatch's attending the virtual group for this, because we have the West Midlands Healthwatch network where we come together, and Chris Bain from Healthwatch Warwickshire has been the West Midlands network representative on the adult critical care review oversight group. So this is mainly for your information. In terms of here and UHCW, it means that there would be some increase in the number of critical care beds. whereas in other areas they might be adjusted differently.
Dennis, you want to contribute here?
Sorry, I covered my mute button up. Yeah, I read the quite interesting paper, and I didn't realise that we were all clubbed together for the Midlands, and then there's 10 million people live in the Midlands. It goes from Lincolnshire or Nottinghamshire all the way across to Herefordshire, and I worked it out. There's one critical care bed for 16,500 people. That seems a very, very low provision rate to me. If it's going to cater for ordinary critical care and COVID as well, it still seems a bit low. Can we compare it with other regions, and can we break it down into, like you mentioned, the local hospital we're getting more, but the paper.
Yeah, I can get you some figures, Dennis, and send those around after the meeting. So this review is around increasing capacity by 20%. There will be COVID surge capacity available should that be needed, and we get to that point again in the COVID pandemic. But what's being described here is more of a long-lasting change, really. So actually, it's quite important that they kind of consider it and get it right, isn't it? For the different populations across the West Midlands.
Anything further from anyone on this issue before we move on? Okay, so are you happy you have all you need from that, Ruth?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So that was mainly for information, but I will seek out some of the figures and stuff, and our representative on the group is the contact for that.
Thank you. We welcome Rose from the Clinical Commissioning Group. Rose, sitting very patiently waiting to talk to us about the latest. What could you tell us?
So I think probably the best update I can give at the moment is we are continuing with our work towards application for merger. We're sending things for a pre-application look over at the end of August, and then our final application is in September. I know you've been working on the constitution and some of the other bits, but it'd be really interesting just kind of get if we have time to get your feedback on how that's been going and how that work has been going with the group for the constitution, because I know there's a few people that have attended.
Shall I just say, before we talk about that, shall I just say also about the meeting that you, Chris from Healthwatch Warwickshire, and there's a person whose name will come to me in a minute. Yes, Anna Hargrave, yeah, yes. Where we were talking about the communication and engagement strategy, which is really important. Yes. So we had a bit of a kind of storming session in terms of what we thought and identifying some of the challenges that there have been and where we might want to get to in the future. But that was kind of the start of that process. Can you just say where you've got to with that now as well, Rose?
So, I mean, that meeting was really, really valuable in terms of the feedback from you and from Chris, and how we look to work together. And I think it was great, and that it really felt we set a direction that we want Healthwatch and Healthwatch activities to be integral to what we are doing, particularly as a new organisation. So I have now, based on that, drafted a communications and engagement strategy specifically for patients, voluntary sector and the public. What we've done as well with the strategy is we've looked at it and thought actually a lot of our comms and engagement strategies for the NHS try to cover absolutely everything. So we've got our stakeholder work in there in terms of the hospitals and so on. We've got all our staff stuff, we've got all our member stuff. So we thought what we wanted to really do was a strategy that was purely about how we interact with our population and sort of with the voluntary sector as well. So I've drafted that. It was approved yesterday by Jill and Adrian as the chief execs to kind of move forward with. So my next step is, it's really important that this is socialised quite widely. So the next step, and we're going to invite, as we discussed on last call, Ruth, we're going to invite you and Chris back to sort of really go step through the document. We've set 5 goals, objectives for ourselves that we feel are realistic, we are realistic and actually will fundamentally reduce health inequality and improve health and well-being. So a lot about how we become more culturally competent and how we interact with the voluntary sector. So that will be the next step. I need to get that meeting in the diary for the next week or so. The nice thing from a merger application point of view is we're submitting a draft, and I'm very clear within it that it is a draft because I haven't had the feedback. This needs to be a document that all of us buy into, not just what we've decided that we are going to do. So that would be the context of that. So I think we're really happy with how that work's progressing. I think that the meeting that we had was great. It felt there was lots of energy and lots of sort of desire from all of us to sort of work together. So that's been really, really good. I suppose the other little bit would be we've sent the letter from our chairs to you asking for your feedback on merger. So,
Yeah, we discussed that in our pre-meet, Rose. So we are going to reply. So we will take that opportunity, obviously, also to stress the things that we hold dear, and that the opportunity from the merged CCG to take forward this really important work in terms of how this communicates with and engages with patients and the public, how that can be really strengthened. And also some more thinking about the relationship with the Healthwatches, the 2 Healthwatches across the CCG footprint, and also some of the other discussions that are going on around the places. So the sort of sub areas of which Coventry is a place. So I know that David wants to talk about the constitution stuff. So sure. I mean that's harder in a way for us to feed into because it's a constitution, isn't it?
Yes, I do appreciate that. So I think just on the letter, I think if you do, raising that would be really, really valuable to us. We have, as one of the other things to mention, we've adopted the Healthwatch Charter within this new strategy in terms of engagement and sort of holding us against that, which I think is really important.
So that's our good engagement charter, which can still be found on our website.
That's where I cut and paste it from.
David, you wanted to comment on the constitution meeting you and I both attended.
Sorry, are you speaking to me?
Yes, I was. I was just
sorry,
saying...
my telephone's ringing, and I'm afraid it was camouflaging what you were saying. Yeah. Rose, were you virtually at the meeting that Nicola King held about the constitution a couple of weeks ago?
I wasn't, no, although I have been at some of Nicola's meetings. I haven't been at the public facing ones because Anita's been running those.
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to check on that because we have reported this to the steering group already, but Stuart and I asked questions related to the constitution in terms of complete lack of any mention of engagement, participation with patients and the community. And the answer that Nicola gave, and again, I'm asking you this because it wasn't well explained at the meeting. She seems to be her company working as an advisor to the CCGs. She said that no, the constitution would be as lean as possible. And if there was any more work to be done about engagement, it would be in the governance handbook, which subsequently we thought we're disappointed. Stuart and I were disappointed with the response on that. I just would like you to comment on that, really.
So, and I think that's reasonable. That's always the difficulty with constitutions, with what we want to put in the actual constitution and what you want to put in the sort of notes around it. I think for the constitution, my understanding is that it will be explicit that we are bound, that the TCG will be bound by all of our statutory obligations to involve, and there's a huge amount that sits underneath that in terms of the NHS England patient participation. Obviously, we have the equality duty as well as parts of the Equalities Act. So all of that, I think, in the Constitution, there is, to an extent, there is a confirmation that that's what's in there. But I wonder if there's something, maybe I can feed that back again if you don't feel within the meeting that actually came up. So I can feed that back again and say, is there a form of wording that we can put in there that more correctly signposts potentially, or more explicitly rather than correctly?
I think the point David's making, Rose, is it was raised in the meeting because we raised it. We didn't really get the response, or any response that was that we could take away and say this is really what's going to happen. It was sort of nodded and let's move on to the next item. I know that's a fair observation, David.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that. So yeah,
so, okay then. So if Rose can go back and raise what you think, then I think that would be helpful, wouldn't it, at this point in time? And it's just about making sure that things are sufficiently linked together and signposted, isn't it? Yes. I don't think we're saying you want a huge constitution with everything and everything in it, but it's just about making sure that there's sufficient marker, because it could link potentially to the culture and the ethos of the organisation as set up. So I think that's why we flag it, really.
Dennis wants to raise a point. We'll come to in a second, Dennis. Could I just ask one more, Rose, before we move to Dennis's point? I mean, yes, having a representation from the patient's perspective is critical, as we just pointed out, but what consultations so far have the GPs and the practices themselves been involved with regarding the merger?
So we did a really extensive piece of work with the practices on the run up to their vote, because obviously they've all voted individually as practices for merger. So we started that. I've just written up the engagement report actually, so I'm going to be nerdy. December 19th, we started December 19th by giving them the options and actually discussing something needs to change. The long-term plan came out and that actually reinforced our direction. We've all talked sort of very much at length about us moving to an ICS and how we can facilitate that to meet the needs of the long-term plan, but also because we genuinely believe that it's the right thing for our area to do that. So at that point, we've kept up the dialogue with GPs. All our governing bodies voted for it. So that was the initial discussion. We developed a case for change, which the governing bodies looked at, voted upon, and said, yes, we want to recommend that merger is we agree we all need change, and we believe that merger and merging the CCGs rather than looking at joint working or looking at another option and do nothing option, I suppose, merger is the right one. We then spent in Coventry, from that point in May, we took an indicative vote with the GPs at that point to say, look, do we actually want to pursue this at all, or do you just want to do nothing? Do you not want to do it? They came back and the vote was for yes, we want to pursue this. We then spent the rest from about, I think, June right through to the vote in January, talking to GPs at them till they really were quite sick of us talking about it. So we've done awful lot of meetings. We've held members councils for them. We have sent out packs of information. We've done frequently asked questions. The LMC have been very involved with this in terms of they've asked a lot of questions as well and come back to it. And every practice has multiple contacts, both at PCN and at practice level, to make sure that they feel they have the information they needed to vote on whether we become a merged organisation based on the case for change and the principles within that case for change. So it's been pretty extensive with members in terms of the concept of merger, I suppose, of do we merge, do we not? Following that, they have also the constitution is fundamentally, it's their constitution as member organisations, so they will then look at that. We've talked to them already. We've picked representatives from PCNs and so on. They've nominated themselves, who've already been in those constitution meetings similar to the ones that you were in. And we've done quite extensive GP engagement on it.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for those. Dennis, yes, please.
Yeah, sounds like we're founding fathers of the American Constitution or something. Hopefully they'll be open to amendments later on. But no, my point is basically, again, public engagement, not engagement.
Yeah.
The results from actually looking at patients' reference panels now, what are they called? I can't remember. They change their name every now and then. when I was looking at the websites, I was trying to find more information, and it looks to me that it hasn't been a very big success. GPs having patient reference panels and then meeting regularly. And I've just thought that maybe you could slip that in the Constitution, because it will go back to them for ratification, and they'll have to agree to actually do something, you know. But that's.
I think in terms of they're bound from patient reference groups. My understanding is obviously every GP practice is bound to have patient engagement in some form. That comes within their own contract that they hold with NHS England, as opposed to in our constitution as a CCG. It's something I can note back. I'm going to talk to Anita, who's our head of governance, and Nicola anyway, to sort of raise the points that have been made about that constitution, and I can look in depth as if there's anything that we can have. I think in terms of the actual constitution itself of the CCG, I think what you're looking at is a little bit more what sits within the individual contracts of the GPs that they hold with NHS England. That's a national contract, and we have no influence over what is in the national contract, apart from what is, what's put out to consultation beforehand on occasions that it is. I think there's possibly another opportunity again within the PCN contracts. There is part of becoming and do stop me if we have already gone through this, but as PCNs develop, they have to move along a maturity matrix. So in terms of being a fully developed PCN that does all the things that PCNs are meant to do, to just starting out, which is kind of where we are and where we have been. Part of that is patient engagement and engagement with the local community. So they are, and with the voluntary sector, and they are measured on that as they move along the maturity matrix and become a full PCN. One of the things that they have to move along with is that their ability to engage with the local population. So I think that's probably more, if I'm understanding you right, more likely where that would fit in terms of creating different types of ways of engaging with the public.
Does that answer your point, Dennis?
Well, it deflects the point, which is your job. But my main problem is that over I don't know how many years I've been involved in local looking at healthcare. There's never always been promising more to get public involvement. You can't. I don't think you can have a constitution without mentioning the public and their involvement. I don't think it would hold up. And if this is your chance to actually get it to the people who are going to ratify it in a meaningful way. I understand your point about the contract, but that's kind of that's linked to finances and things like that. That's not linked to finding out what your local patients think of while you're doing your job. It just doesn't happen.
So I think we are trying to put in mechanisms to make it happen. And I think that's where I'm trying to get to with the comms engagement strategy that we discussed first with Ruth. Obviously, when I send that out, Ruth will share that around. And we hope that does I know because I wrote it, it does explicitly detail the importance of that work, of engaging patients at a system, at a place level, at a PCN level, and at a practice level. The Constitution is for the CCG and how we operate. So from our perspective in the Constitution, we need to be really clear that we will abide by what the laws under which we're held for involvement, which we are. It is part of the Health and Social Care Act in terms of that involvement, and that's really, really important. And if we don't feel that is clear enough in the Constitution, I think that's really good feedback, and I'm sorry it wasn't addressed in the meeting, but I will absolutely take that back again and raise it again, because I feel as you do. I think it's vitally important. What I want to make sure is that within the Constitution may not be the place for the specific detail of the how. That should be within our communications and engagement strategy, and within our commissioning strategy for population health management as well, and within our primary care strategy for how we do PCN. So for me, it's where we build those mechanisms, not that they're not important, because I agree with you that they are vital and that it is sort of baked into the CCG, but it's making sure that we get the right level of detail at the right bits.
Good, thank you very much. Apollo, you want to raise an issue? Could you put your microphone on, Apollo, please? Thank you.
Sorry. It's just about this merger is a golden opportunity, and the merger is something I personally voted for anyway. but it's a golden opportunity to get the public involvement, to get down to the grassroots level as much as we are able to, get people to understand how the CCG works, but importantly, how the PRGs work. Because the great weakness of the patient reference groups, or whatever they're called, is that it varies from practice to practice. We've got to get some continuity, we've got to get some agreement as to how to do it, and we've got to make sure that all practices do this, because this is a golden opportunity to get the voice from the grassroots. And hitherto, this hasn't been done. The CCG tried to do this a little while ago by bringing together the representatives from the different PRGs, and that led to an interesting exchange of views, but it petered out. Now, I think we need something like that. Use the patient groups. They're the people on the ground. They are talking to other patients. Why should use this to try to get that involvement?
That's very much a point that I made at the meeting David and I attended, Apollo, that more than that, actually, this is a golden opportunity to explain to the public, many of whom won't have a clue what CCG is or what it stands for, exactly what it's all about, what is going on with the health service that they're relying on. And the patient participation groups are clearly essential to that. I mean, that's something else, Rose, perhaps you could take away. Your mic switched off.
I think it switched itself off that time. I was sick of hearing. I think from my perspective, I completely agree. I think that the PPGs are a really important aspect of engagement. And I think for me, one of the things within the with the communications and engagement strategy is how we do that involvement and how we support practices. And going back again to the point I was trying to make with Dennis around the PCNs, and how each PCN, each primary care networks, a group of 8 or 9 practices, how are their PPGs going to get together and share information over a wider area that might help with things like social prescribing, that might help with the link workers. And I think you're absolutely right. This gives us a bit of, as we go to an ICS as well, as we have our places, it gives us that opportunity to say, right, we are going to take a new look at this. We're going to understand how we do this. Not PPGs are really, really important resources, but they don't work for everybody. And I think it's really important to have that side of, we have the view, we have the voice of the PPG, we have the voice of the voluntary and community sector who are linked into communities that we maybe don't have as good links to. We've got our community champions and all these different, how do we make sure that all of that information gets up to the point of a system commissioner, it gets into place, so it really, everything we do and that patient voice genuinely is embedded at every point of we commission. So when we're planning, we know what all of our local communities think about this, about what we're planning. We know what the barriers would be for access. For example, if you're up in if you're in Fossil, you may have very different access barriers. For if you're in Willenhall, all these different barriers that you might have, we need to know what they are on a community level. So some of that will be at PCN, some of that will be at practice level. And I think we need to embed that knowledge as we plan. And then we need to retain those links, and the PPG again remain a very important part of that, as to, is the service actually working, is getting that feedback, getting that ongoing feedback as well. So I completely agree, and this is for me, it's quite really exciting. This is a chance for us to make sure that this engagement in the engagement strategy and our commissioning strategy, population health management, is absolutely baked in, and we've got commitment from the sort of the top levels of the CCG to say, yes, we won't take anything through board, for example, that doesn't have not just an equality impact assessment, but an understanding of how this service is going to impact on our local communities and how we would address any barriers for their access. And the PPGs are a really important sort of source of information for that, and making sure that each practice at practice level and at PCN level is able to have one. They do have already within their contracts that they have to have one. So that bit is not sort of, we already have that sort of, you must have a PPG, but it's how we can make the PPG's voice heard further up. And I think that is really important. So I'll note that back as well in sort of my discussions. I think that'd be really useful.
Thank you. Christine, you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. Just picking up, Rose, on your point about engaging communities into obviously consultation. And I just wanted to really get your perspective in terms of future planning, because obviously there is obviously a partnership working that needs to take place with the voluntary and community sector. And many of us now in the voluntary and community sector, our organisations are closed, or we have very, very limited opening. You know, our organisation, we're doing very, very limited engagement with women. And also, on top of that, you've got the digital divide. So actually, if you're trying to engage the hardest to reach who are already excluded, the options of doing that are quite limited if everything was sort of digital. So what are your thoughts, or have you undertaken any planning about how you're going to engage in communities, if it's going to be a lot harder to reach those communities in the future when there are less opportunities, less focus groups going on, there's less work that's actually happening, particularly if we're looking at protecting BME communities as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something we've identified very much as a problem, as a difficulty for us. I know the problem may be the wrong phrasing. It is really hard. We have galloped necessarily. We have become very digital first, and we have to be aware within all of our activities that actually that's not working for everyone. That's not going to work for everyone. We've got some of the outreach work. Some of the outreach work that Sue Mangawal, who some of you may know, has been doing. So previous to COVID hitting, she was starting a really good set of community engagement events where Equip were putting things on, and we were attending and doing sort of health intervention. It was working really well, and that's, from us, that's all stopped. We can't do that at the moment. So I think we are very, very conscious of that. It's something that, again, we've noted as being something we have to work on. We have got a network we've built a small network of community champions. The council have got some as well. I think I mentioned them last time, some migrant champions. And looking at how we can use those people who are already in their local community, who are on the local community WhatsApp group, because I find, yes, I appreciate that even that is within the digital divide, but we have found a lot more people turn out to be on WhatsApp than on Twitter, for example, or surfing the internet. They will almost definitely have a WhatsApp or someone that will pass on the messages. So but we can't join all those groups. That wouldn't be appropriate. So we need community assets. We need community assets. We need to be linked into our champions who will say, yeah, we'll forward that message on. So
Rose, so can I just sort of make a suggestion, because we're just conscious of the time at the moment.
Sorry.
So clearly this is an area that people are really interested in. So I think we need to think about how we plan in some conversations so that we can focus on this a bit more in the future. So can I ask you to give that some thought, because I know you've obviously got a deadline, haven't you, as part of the application process for the CCG, but you've said you're going to submit a draft document. So we need to think around touching times, don't we, to gather some input from other people, really. So
from my perspective, this is, as you can tell, because I would talk about this all day and completely derail your meeting, because I'm really passionate about it as well. But for me, I think I don't want to. The deadline, we'll get the draft in. Obviously, I want to make sure that you, as Healthwatch, are happy with it. But it needs to have that buy-in. So we'll put a draft in, but we need to make sure that it's right before we kind of just dive into it, because it's the antithesis of what it should be. Is we've decided how we're going to engage, and now we're going to tell you how you would like to be engaged. That's not what we want the document to be. So I think if people would be, my plan was to sort of look at doing some workshops in terms of, these are our thoughts, these are our key objectives, this is how we see that we'll get to them, these are what we think the barriers are, but your feedback would be vital for that. So over the next, so I just don't want to be constrained by the deadline of getting something to NHS England on this. Over the next few months, I want to put those bits in so we can end up with a sort of common engagement strategy that all of us are bought into, not just sort of us here, but the community voluntary sector as well, because I think it's really, really important. And I will stop, Ruth, I'm really sorry. The only other thing from the community and voluntary sector that's really important to me is how can we support them? We have identified the problem that a lot of people are, a lot of volunteers are shielding at the moment, and that's something that was raised at the meeting. We had a lot of activities are stopped. A lot of finances have not been where they were pre-COVID levels. So what can we do to sort of, or to commission, to look at how we can do engagement in that way? Or there are lots of different options of making sure it's a sort of mutually beneficial relationship. Because we are conscious that we quite often rock up and just say, right, can we have all of your resources and your contacts, please? But how can we make it work for everybody? I've stopped now.
Thank you very much indeed. And as Ruth says, we are conscious of time. We have run on quite a bit from that, but thank you very much indeed, Rose,
Yes.
for sharing all that with us. Healthwatch work, then we move on to.
I'm really sorry. I've just had one completely not merger related CCG one that I wanted to raise, if that's okay. I promise to be incredibly quick.
Yes, it can be quick.
Yes, GPIT. I've had feedback that at PCC quite often there are questions coming from Healthwatch about various GPIT bits, and there maybe isn't the space within the meeting to answer them as fully as we would like, and I think that maybe that you guys need. So I just wanted to see quickly if there was any appetite for setting up a separate meeting just to talk about those GPIT, the progression of what we're seeing. I think it would fit in quite well, Ruth, with the work that you've done.
When you say GPIT, you're talking about the digital agenda, really, are you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in fact, we are going to talk about that in the next few minutes anyway. But yeah, that's a valid point. Maybe we should schedule a separate meeting to discuss that with you. Ruth, can we move on to papers 3, 4, and 5?
Okay then. So paper 3 is our activity report. So this is the report on the work that we have been doing since the last steering group meeting then. So at the last meeting we agreed our priority areas under which we wanted to hang our different pieces of work. So the first one is obviously around making sure that the views and needs of local people are taken into account in the digital and non-face-to-face agenda. So we're all kind of acknowledging that that's really important. So some of the things that have gone on is that I did a presentation to the Primary Care Network Leeds meeting about our findings from the digital report. And also there were findings in there as well which were related to communication and engagement from GP practices. So just in the light of the previous discussions, so that discussion was quite focused on patient participation groups, but actually what we found in our research was that there was quite an appetite for GP practices to do other stuff, to approach that quite differently. So patient participation groups would work for some people, but not for all. And as Apollo said, there's also quite a lot of variation around GP practices, and we didn't find that much awareness of those groups either. So all of those things are kind of worth bearing in mind. So we've discussed some next steps off the back of the meeting, the PCN Leeds meeting. So that's something that we need to think about, Rose, is what's going to happen next. I know it's holiday periods at the moment, and you've got all these deadlines for the merger, which is going to have an impact, isn't it? So my suggestion was potentially that we had a task group with the PCNs around taking it forward, and then there was another suggestion around maybe working with one of the primary care networks on trying to develop some stuff. So there's some other pieces of work which are sort of got some linkage points in. So we're just been looking, and some of the volunteers on the steering group have been helping to do this. We've been looking at GP practices website information for the public at the moment. So we've been looking to see how clear the information is around accessing GP appointments and other GP services at this time. So we've just nearly completed looking at the GP website, so we'll be writing that up. But I think, again, that kind of indicates some of the challenges that GP practices have in terms of every single GP practice trying to produce information and put out information for their practice populations, and that can be quite tricky for them, really. The other thing, and the paper which you have as well in your pack, is the joint work which Healthwatch England has been doing, and the report which has come out, which is called The Doctor Will Zoom You Now. So this is off the back of some research which has been undertaken. And it's started to identify, I guess, some good practice points, which I think Healthwatch England are thinking about how they might take forward. So as we've acknowledged, that there's been a big shift away from face-to-face appointments. So the stats that are in that report indicate that actually the shift hasn't necessarily been to these kind of online appointments. It's actually largely been to phone at the moment, which is interesting in itself, really, if it's been kind of described as the digital agenda. So there's some interesting findings in that piece of work, and I know that lots of organisations are starting to look at this, and that there's lots of comment things going on about it at the moment. So we could be in a situation where lots of organisations continue to do research, continue to gather people's feedback, and that of course is valid. But Healthwatch England, I think, are considering whether they might need to approach it in a slightly different way in terms of having a campaign around sort of thinking about what the kind of good practice element is. So we've had the Good Engagement Charter as a Healthwatch since the beginning, as principles to hang engagement activity off, or maybe we need something similar around the digital agenda. So those are some of the ideas that are being floated. David, you've got your hand up.
Right, thank you. People will be fed up me going on about this, but putting the several different things together, we have discussed earlier a letter from Sir Simon Stevens, NHS England, and in that letter there was a sentence, this was the 31st of July, all GP practices must offer face-to-face appointments at their surgeries, as well as continuing to use remote triage, online and telephone consultation wherever appropriate. And I think that wherever appropriate, we've got to keep banging the drum about. Yes, of course, there are advantages about digital or even just the telephone. People are getting appointments virtually much quicker. The 3-week waiting time that people were experiencing for months, maybe even years, has virtually gone. And also, they don't have to make the drive to the surgeries. In rural areas, that's quite an important factor. The idea that it's going to fit in better with people's work programs doesn't really work out always, because there are examples in this doctor will Zoom you now of people who waited in all day for a doctor to phone and it never happened. So it doesn't always work out that well. But I think there's only one sentence in this document that emphasizes that going to a surgery is still quite important. This sentence says, where a physical examination or test is required. Now, we all have been to the surgery for all sorts of reasons: knee pain, an unexplained lump, a physical examination that can only be done physically, maybe a blood test, maybe simply the pulse rate being taken. And they are pretty important still, I think. And then there are people, and Chris referred to this earlier, she talked about the digital divide, the hardest to reach already excluded. And we've got people with learning difficulties, autism, mental health conditions. These are all people who are going to find doing remotely things much more difficult. And I think we've just got to be very careful that Matt Hancock's extreme statement that he made last week about this could all become virtual, that this doesn't become the fact, because it's not a good thing if it does. One more thing, I'm a bit concerned that this report is based on 49 people. All right, they asked 80 people to start with, but for various reasons, some weren't suitable, some didn't follow it up. So it's based on 49 people, which I think Ruth would say, if we ever submitted a report based on 49 people, we've been told it wouldn't be a representative survey. So I've got some major doubts about this whole process.
It was done quite quickly, David, and I suppose it's the difference, isn't it, between a big public survey and doing something which is a bit more in depth, where you actually try to understand more people's experiences. But I guess what I'm also flagging up is that there's lots of people doing pieces of work at the moment. So one of the considerations nationally, I guess, is how much do you do, because you might be identifying the same issues, so to speak. So
I think it's also important to note, by the way, that inevitably, because of the circumstances in which we find ourselves, this piece of work was conducted over the phone by people asking about people being consulted over the phone. So you're going to get a sway of opinion one way or the other by people who've been through that process, either liking it or not. And I think to some extent it's a self-fulfilling prophecy to some. And I'm also taken by the use of language. I mean, the start of it, the doctor will zoom in out, getting the most out of the virtual health and care experiencing, which itself implies it's a good thing. And David is obviously not convinced. And Christine using the words digital divide. You won't get Matt Hancock saying that. He talked about the digital agenda. We do have I think this is a very critical point. I think you're absolutely right, David, to raise it in the way you do. This is something that we must keep on the agenda, whatever your views about it, because it is something that is not going to go away very clearly, but it has to be put into context, I think.
And I don't want it to go away. I think there could be great advantages for it. But just one more point. Ruth mentioned about the work that people are doing. Dennis and I did this digital practices survey of their websites. I had 12 practices to look at, and I did it in the last few days. 4 of those 12 practices said website temporarily unavailable, and that's all it had on the site. So anybody of those 12,000 people, maybe in that surgery, was trying to find that question about immunization or anything at all, would not have been able to get on it. Now, 2 of those have been restored, but 2 of them have had that on now for about 10 days. So this is another example of where, far from enhancing people's communications, they can be blocked very simply.
Apollo wants to come in. I'll come to you in a second, Apollo, just to make the point that inevitably this issue is also being raised regularly at the Health and Wellbeing Board. And the last time it was, and I raised some of the points that you, David, and Dennis and others have been mentioning in our meetings, there was a representative at that meeting from a GP practice in Kenilworth who said, we've been carrying out telephone triage and video consultations for the past 4 years, and it works perfectly, unquote. So you've got that inbuilt bias, I'm afraid, from within some, not all, obviously, some GP practices before you start. Apollo, what is it you want to say?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think this COVID situation has speeded up the use of IT enormously, and that is to be welcomed up to a point. We mustn't be carried away by this, as I think David was saying. Most of the work at the moment that is being carried on remotely, as my understanding, talking to a lot of patients in different practices, is by telephone. It's not by any other use, by telephone. The other thing I want to make is that the one of the benefits of face-to-face is that people often come in with what they really want to talk about, and that doesn't happen until the end, almost as they're going out the door. What I really wanted to say was this. Now, you're cutting off that. Now, I belong to a practice with a very high proportion of old people. They have special requirements. That's the sort of thing they will do. They will go in and say, oh, by the way, doctor, etc. We mustn't lose sight of that. Face-to-face is critical, but there is a very real role for alternative ways of doing it.
That's a very, very valid point. Thank you. Ed Devane, you want to say something? Your mic's turned off, Ed.
Yeah, I just probably wanted, with regard to this discussion, ask Rose then what was this proposal for maybe a special meeting specifically dealing with GP kind of IT issues? Who would be attending it as a representative from the CCG? And is this meant to replace our attendance on the PCC meeting maybe? Because I do feel like we have been raising these issues since April or something, and now they're being discussed finally in a bit more detail at the PCC meetings, and they're actually having a budgetary impact, and there's practical problems with rolling out GP IT capital. So just wondered if you had some more information on that last point you made.
Sure, it's not to replace PCC, it's in conjunction with. We hope you do continue to attend PCC. That's not at all what this is. I think what we wanted to do was to make sure that you had the space to have the full discussion and get any other information that you needed in addition to PCCC. So it's an open offer. So Nikki Templey was the one who mentioned it to me, that she thought actually maybe having a longer discussion would be beneficial, so we don't get cut off, you know, through having a wider agenda to work through, that we can actually have that full discussion. I assume Roma Holland would attend as well in terms of being the IT rep. It's an open offer. I mean, it's one of those things. Obviously, PCCC is really important. We want that in, but just if you wanted further information, you wanted us to devote a full session, then we'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you. I'm going to call a halt to this in a second because of time, but Dennis, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think it was before last November, I was raising questions about the IT strategy, because you have been spending £1 million a year on it, and I was trying to find out what that spend was on, and all it was an entry in the ledger, Windows 10 or doc plan, you know, which is we never ever got an answer to what the money was spent on. And subsequently, at every meeting we've been to, I've literally been told, "Oh, that's another committee's responsibility." And I thought, well, what does the PCC do if it can't actually examine what money's been spent in that area on IT? And so I'd welcome a meeting just to find out if the strategy has been converted into deliverable milestones, because obviously money has been spent. Now, the latest thing from April is to actually allow emergency spending for remote working by GPs. Now, I can understand that. I can't quite understand how you have to buy equipment for private businesses, but I'll go over that point, you know. But that was my history of.
Okay, so I think that's a yes then to setting something up then, Rose. So I'll liaise about doing that, and then we can get into more of the details. I think that would be
obviously an issue that a lot of people want to have their say about, and clearly we would welcome that meeting, Rose. Thank you very much. Ruth, representatives report, we've got paper 5.
Okay, just a couple more things off the work programme report. So we have also been making contact with care home managers. We're bringing that to a close now, so I'll be writing that up. So we've managed to make contact with 25 of the managers out of the 35 care homes which were on the list when we started. Although I've also heard that the Langley's care home has had a significant flood, and the residents have been moved out, and the Elm Farm care home has closed because the owner, it was an independent private care home, and then they've decided that they can't carry on at this anymore. So actually the list of care homes is reduced. So I think that's a really good response rate, and I think we've got some quite interesting stuff that's come from that, which we'll be writing up. The other thing which I've been doing, which is perhaps not detailed on this paper because it's moved forward more recently, is that I've done a proposal for a joint piece of work across NHS organisations, and also it would involve social care at the council as well. So it's linked to the national piece of work which Healthwatch England and the CQC identified around discharge from hospital. But it would be more in-depth and targeted work. So it would potentially be Healthwatch partnering with those organisations so that we could gather the views of people who had experienced discharge from hospital. So I've presented that proposal to one of the current groups which is overseeing NHS and social care, and they were very positive about it. So it needs to be worked up further. So I will let you know how that goes. So it's to overcome the fact that it's actually really difficult for us to reach patients at the moment, because we can't do our normal visits or face-to-face mechanisms. So it will be relying on the organisations to identify the people, a bit like the pieces of work we've done in the past where we have targeted recipients of home support and things like that, where we've used our independence in order to sell the involvement and produce the survey tools or whatever, and have the stuff coming back to us, but another organisation has helped to identify people. So I think that's quite positive. You've also got some figures around what we've been doing over the last quarter in the report as well. So Sue Ogle might want to come in and just give a brief update on where things are at with the contract for Healthwatch delivery at this point, because we are now in August, which is the point at which the new contract started.
Sue.
Yeah, happy to update people. Understandably, our commissioner, who is in adult social care, is quite busy, has been quite busy over the last few months. So I think we have to appreciate that the Healthwatch grant possibly comes slightly lower on priorities. I'm trying to be fair here. At this point in time, we haven't actually had the final grant aid agreement. We have had a draft version which we've had to comment on and ask for some changes to be made, and we're now waiting a final version. It does mean that we haven't actually had any money for this period, which is slightly worrying, although the Commissioner is going to chase that through finance at the City Council, so I'm not overly concerned. It does mean, however, that there's 4 months interim period that we'd hoped we could use to really get things in place and hit the ground running from the beginning of August has not been used in that way because of the delay. Still, we are progressing things. We've got 2 posts that are being recruited to at the moment, and hope to interview at the beginning of September. And then hopefully we will start to bring the main Healthwatch delivery into VAC, as we've talked about previously, and that the Independent Complaints Advisory Service, or IHCA, which it's now called, which I can't actually remember what those letters stand for without looking it up. That is at the moment still planned to be delivered by Law Centre Central England, but we're just in the process of negotiating that, and the relationship now between that service and Healthwatch, because it is separate under the terms of Healthwatch England. So a little bit more work to be done before we are the fully formed Healthwatch to take forward the next 3 years of delivery.
Thank you, Sue. Any questions or comments anybody wants to make about all of that? Polly, you still got your hand up. I take it that was from the previous intervention, was it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, it was a previous one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Ruth, yes, please.
Okay, so so then you've got your report from the representatives, so are attending of different meetings and groups. So we've got the Health and Wellbeing Board Test and Trace subgroup, which oversees the testing and tracing locally for COVID-19. I've included the link to the papers in this report because I know some of you have got quite a keen interest in this, and actually the papers are really interesting, and I think would provide you with lots of information about what's happening and some of the plans for the kind of what ifs for the future as well, which you might be interested in. So this meeting's gone into the public domain so that it was live streamed, as was the Health and Wellbeing Board on the 27th of July. What you'll probably notice from these reports is that a lot of the same items and information has been provided at different meetings. So I think that's in part been to catch things up after the period where there weren't some of the meetings taking place, or there were informal meetings. There was also a meeting of scrutiny, which David attended, and you can see that focused on the similar things that we have, and there was a meeting of the Coventry and Warwickshire Place Forum as well. So I think it's positive that more of the meetings are taking place and that they've gone back into the public domain. I've also continued the discussions around where Healthwatch might sit in future structures. So some of there's some new thinking going on around what structures will exist locally in Coventry, so for Coventry Place as it's known, and an acknowledgement that Healthwatch hasn't been at the tables as they have been, and that we will need to be in the future. But progress on that, we're probably looking towards sort of October, November time really for things to shake through, and for things to go into their next stage, and involve us. So I will keep you involved. But there's some recruitment going on. So there's recruitment going on for the post which supports Coventry Place at the moment. Obviously there's recruitment going on in the CCG as well for the accountable officer, which we're taking place in. So there's quite a lot of change and shifting going on at the moment, which we will keep abreast of.
Illustrative of that, of course, is the news today about the change to test and trace, where Serco, the national company, has been commissioned to do the work so far and has produced very, very nominal results. Very small numbers of people have come back to them. So it's hardly world beating as it was claimed to be. And they're now proposing to continue with Serco, but to put money into local councils, believe it or not, so that they can go door to door following up test and trace contacts. It'll be interesting to see next time we meet what impact that's had in Coventry. Bearing in mind there have been some local areas of concern, mainly in Foleshill, Holbrooks, Longford, and of course the two big Tesco superstores have been making the news, both Arena Park and Cannon Park.
Yeah, so I do look at the papers from the test and trace subgroup. They're very good. So public health in Coventry has got a really strong lead, as all public health departments will have around the country. Coventry is a big city, isn't it? So we have seen what has happened in other areas of the country in big urban populations, and as Stuart said, there has been an increase in known COVID cases in Coventry over the last couple of weeks. So there's been quite a lot of activity going on. There's also a pop-up test centre on Moat Street car park at the moment, which has been commissioned locally, and will be reviewed. So the kind of access to testing locally is being thought about and reviewed as well, and what might need to be put in place.
And possibly another one in Foleshill they're talking about as well in the next little while, but we'll see. Okay, thank you. Healthwatch England update. You have paper 6.
So this is just some information for you really in terms which has come from Healthwatch England, to show the benefit really of how we cascade information up to Healthwatch England and how they've used it. So they were feeding information into the select committee, which was looking at some of the aspects of what's been going on. So that's for your information as a kind of feedback loop thing really, so that you can see the connectivity. And I would say that this has been one of the positives to emerge out of the COVID situation really, in that there's been quite a lot of national decision making, as there would be in a time of crisis, and that shakes down into the local. So having Healthwatch England as a national body for Healthwatch, where we can channel information and they can pick up on the issues is quite important. So for example, if the piece of work that we want to do around hospital discharge goes ahead, actually the parameters for hospital discharge have been quite heavily set nationally at the moment. So it's important that local Healthwatch can have a route to pass information which is to represent the interests of patients, and get that voice in at a national level.
Thank you. Anyone want to comment? Any hands raised? No. In which case, let's move on to the CQC strategy review, which you also have paper 7, smarter regulation for a safer future.
Yeah, so again, I just wanted to flag this up to you at this point. So you've got the entire presentation from a meeting that I went to, but it's not really the entire presentation that you would need to look at, but sort of from the middle onwards, the CQC has set out some parameters and things which things that it needs to consider really in terms of its future role and delivery of being the regulator for health and social care. So those of you who've been involved in Healthwatch for a little while will know that there are fairly regular reviews at the CQC in terms of their approach and the way that they do things. And this is just the start of the next process. So have a look at that and see their thinking. We get invited to quite regular webinars with the CQC. So if anybody is interested in picking up a little bit of an area around the Care Quality Commission, let me know, and I can try and hook you into those webinars, really, because they're drawing on attenders from Healthwatch from all around the country, and some of them are really well attended, as an opportunity to hear what their thinking is, and that there's acknowledgement, which I think is really important from a Healthwatch, a local Healthwatch point of view, is we have relationships with the local with the local CQC, because we need to pass on intelligence and information about services to help inform them. But sometimes it feels like we don't get very much back. So they've kind of acknowledged that within their sort of review, which is important.
Thank you, Ruth. We move on to any other business, and we've got 2 items, and obviously anyone else wants to raise something, please do. I would certainly endorse you reading the King's Fund publication if you haven't already done so. In many ways, it is the agenda that we sit and discuss and are faced with at the Health and Wellbeing Board. At least the Health and Wellbeing Board spends a lot of time discussing the King's Fund recommendations and its priorities for health and care, which goes hand in hand with the City Council's Marmot city strategy. But this is a very interesting document, I think, putting together a lot of thoughts. And as Ruth says in her note, it only takes about 15 minutes to read it. It's well worth looking at the way services might be restored in the future, given that anybody can predict what that future is going to look like, the priorities for renewal and so on, and particularly with reference to adult social care. Any thoughts, any comments anybody wants to make? If not, then
So
we'll
just flagging those two documents up for you, really, in terms of national publications, which we often highlight, which people might want to look at. Obviously, the other is around the quite significant evidence base, which is still obviously developing, about the impact of COVID-19 on BAME communities, which again probably links into all these agendas around inequality, doesn't it? And it is a strand through some of the other things that we've been talking around, really, in terms of how do you ensure that people from different communities have the access and aren't disadvantaged, whether it's in a pandemic or whether it's through the normal delivery of services.
Indeed so, yeah. I mean, the whole issue of health inequalities is the key to all of this, isn't it? And I think it's brought out in both those papers. Anything anyone wants to say? Dennis, yes, please.
Yeah, I've read the documents, and I think it's careful to not miss the fact that the NHS generally was running in the red way before the COVID hit, and they do mention that a few places, that it was to just blame, to actually excuse that on the COVID is a big temptation, and I think we've got to make sure we address the problems that were there before COVID came.
Yes, it'd be easy to forget those, wouldn't it, in the light of all this. Christine.
Yeah, thank you. Just very quickly, in terms of, you mentioned Michael Marmot. So there is the Marmot Steering Group in Coventry. There's been a new subgroup that's been created, which, well, there's been a number of subgroups, but one is actually looking at BME health inequalities. So our organisation, we're on that subgroup. So certainly I will feed, I think particularly the SAHAF report. So I'll make sure that that's shared. And what I'll try and do, obviously moving forward, if there's anything that's really crucial that I can share back to Healthwatch, I certainly will do. But that's a brand new BME health inequality subgroup. That's literally, we've had one meeting, but we want to really turn this into action plans rather than just talk. So I'll let you know how we progress with that.
Thank you very much. You're saying that's critical, isn't it? Making things happen rather than just talking about them. Christine, thank you. Ed Devane.
I just wondered if locally, what kind of consultation is going on in the different tiers of the NHS regarding how services are restored and how they're being prioritised, particularly with, all we've been talking about addressing inequalities, and if there's any kind of active consultation going on with that, with how these different services are restored and in what order. I don't know if anybody knows.
There's a lot happening, isn't there, Ruth? I mean, in the consultations and discussions we've been party to, I don't know whether anybody's got a...
Well, I think it's a really good question, actually, Ed, and I think that there's a gap, isn't there? So, we've seen the letter that's come down to the NHS, which sets out the big agenda.
Yeah.
But the how is quite local, and I don't know where or if discussion is going on in terms of that. It could well be within particular organisations. It may be at a more cross-cutting, because everything's interrelated. That's one of the challenges as well, isn't it? So individual organisations could be making decisions which could have a knock-on impact. But it's something that needs to be considered, I think. So obviously we're out of time in this meeting now, so just a couple of suggestions potentially for the next agenda. So the next meeting is on the 6th of October. So Stuart and I had a conversation with Pete Fahey, Director of Adult Social Care at the Council recently, and he floated the idea of potentially coming and speaking to us about the outcome of the last Adult Social Care Peer Challenge. So that peer challenge was completed just before the kind of COVID lockdown. So would that be something that people might want to pick up on the agenda? And then just thinking about some of the conversations that started in Ed's question there, if there was somebody who could come from an NHS perspective around some of the restoration stuff. Rose.
That seems to meet with most of people's approval, lots of heads being nodded. I also wonder, Ruth, and this might be a long shot, I don't know, whether it's worth inviting Liz Galton as Director of Public Health to come and talk to us at some point as well, bearing in mind the role the council is having to play, obviously and properly, in dealing with the COVID issues, particularly if the government is going to put more money in, as they keep on saying they will, for test and trace and so on.
Okay, so I can agree with that as well, but priorities, because last time we had speakers at the meeting, we kind of ran out of time, didn't we? So to actually, if to cover one subject, yes. Two subjects, maybe. Three, probably a bit too much, isn't it, for this length of the meeting? So, so which would you like to focus on?
Well, the overall COVID issues aren't going to go away in a hurry, are they? So Liz Galton, we could perhaps make us as a second, as a number 2 on our agenda.
Yeah, and of course you and I sit on the test and trace subgroup anyway, where there's going to be a lot more detail given around that. So shall we try with social care as number 1? If possible, the NHS, but I think what we've learned from doing these Zoom meetings is, and I know that organisations want to feel that they've sent the best representatives they can, but actually it starts to take quite a long time if we get lots of people from the same organisation, doesn't it? So what I guess we're looking for is an overview. So whoever it is within the system who has the overview. So I shall let you know if I find that is.
As you say, time is our enemy. David, briefly, did you want to add something? You switch your mic off, David.
Just a PS on the public health. Edward Someone, Public Health Minister for the government, was specifically asked whether local councils would get more money so that they could go on knocking door to door and using a lot more local resources. And all he said was, councils have already been given money. So I don't know, you're saying, Stuart, they're going to get extra money. His answer was almost categorically they're not. And I think that's quite significant, because if local authorities, and I think Coventry's been outstanding, and Liz Galton and the work she's done, but if they're really going to develop their work, it costs money.
Yes, I think that they've been trying to clarify that this morning to say there has been more, there will be more. So, but as you say, it's not absolutely clear. So we must keep a watching eye on that. Anyone else like to contribute? Anyone that hasn't done so far? Catherine, do you want to join in the fun, or are you happy? Your mic switched off.
it's very interesting actually listening to all of it, and I would agree with virtually everything that you've been saying. The one thing I was kind of going to say was just around risk assessment. This just goes back to GPs, that if we're looking at people having access via phone or internet or whatever, you need to risk assess the whole process to think about what's going to work best. Risk assessment needs using in lots of different situations, but it might help to identify some pros and cons really. And with the rest of it, just whoa, there's so much. But it's all good stuff. Really.
Good. Thank you very much. Anyone make any final comments or observations? In which case, if you're all done, thank you all very much indeed. And we meet again in October, do we not? Yes, 6th of October. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.